Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 4 survival snippets from the 2020 DragonCon Apocalypse Rising track. We are back with a cabal of likely suspects. We are the people that all too many of our friends blame us for whatever apocalypse is about to occur. And in this segment, we want to talk a little bit about homeschooling. And I'm not talking about teaching the classes at home. What can we do at home to educate ourselves, to educate our kids, to educate our neighbors? What skills should we be looking at? What lesson materials should we be looking at? And what should we try to figure out how to do? Now, let's give this a more classical. What are the essentials in terms of education? We are hopefully going to raise up kids that will eventually restore the civilization that we have just lost. Which should we be teaching them? Sandra?
Well, actually, I want to look at this two different ways. Immediately after some sort of apocalypse, you're going to have to concentrate on survival skills. And then you're not actually going to be looking at what we consider to be education or classical education until you're 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line. And you're going to find people to do the teaching. So I think the first thing you need to do is make sure that you and the people around you know how to survive. And that may mean knowing how to hunt, knowing how to use bow and arrow. In home education, we've taught survival skills to elementary kids, boys and girls, because we were seeing a lot of problems with campers, with Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts getting lost and needing to survive for a couple of days. So those types of classes. Look at gardening, look at canning, look at cooking. How many people can actually sit down and cook a meal without having to refer to a cookbook or most likely their internet? So you want to be educated in that. And that means take your girls and your boys, not just your girls, but and your boys, and teach them how to bake a cake, how to make an entire meal, teach them sewing. We always have this thing where we have to teach our girls how to sew, teach them to make little aprons and little caps and crochet so that we have a scarf and stuff like that. But guys need to learn that stuff too. They're going to have to fix the holes in their jeans. They're going to have to fix a belt, or they're going to lose weight and they need to bring their belt in tighter, things like that. But the biggest thing I want people to think about is you're not going to have the internet. So by golly, you better have a set of cooking books. You better have a set of manuals, things like that, that are going to help you educate. And then a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, then you can begin to look at education classes for the kids and bring them back. You're going to have to teach them how to read. If you're ending up in an apocalypse with a 2-year-old, you're the one that's going to have to teach them how to read. And you're the one that's going to be teaching them the alphabet. And the thing is, with home education, you do that all the time. One of the things that we've talked about with home education groups is we call it car education. And that's when you're in a car with your children, you talk about things with them. You say, what color is that stop sign? What does that sign read? Look at that billboard. And so you teach them constantly. So you're going to do the same thing at home, but you guys may be hoeing a garden and say, okay, let's do the times table. You're hoeing the garden, but I want to hear your 9 times table and things like that. And then after you get through that stage, in my opinion, this is only my opinion, of getting past the apocalypse, surviving through this, then you're going to go out and find your teachers. And you're going to find someone who says, hey, yeah, I was a reading specialist. Give me about 5 kids and we'll teach them how to read. Yeah, hey, I was a math teacher. I'm going to help them learn how to figure. And you're eventually going to have to pick up the higher levels of math and sciences as well, because you want to build up that group of scientists to come, engineers to come. Now, that's just my opinion, and I realize everybody else here is also educated and interested in education, and I'm sure that they have ideas too.
I think one of the things, oh, go ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to add that I grew up in 4-H, and I was doing sewing. I was in the sewing project back in the 90s. And even back then, there were a couple of guys that were in sewing, and they were making themselves fancy barbecue aprons, the ones with all the slots and the nice ties and the pockets and everything like that. And they were just as proud of what they were making as any of the girls were. So, you know, don't get tied into, well, you know, this is kind of traditional. As Sandra was saying, it's just that you may have to focus on different projects that the different kids are going to be interested in.
Animal care as well.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I was also going to say that if it's in your area, you know, 4-H can be a really good way of getting a start on some of these skills and figuring out where your kids' strengths lay. Because not every kid is going to be really keen on sewing, or not every kid's going to be really keen on horticulture or animals or things like this.
One of the things that I was going to bring up is that now, one of the things that we can do now, whether we have children or we just have children in our lives, is we kind of need to reintroduce our children in the fine art of being curious and encouraging their curiosity, because it's really easy for them to spend a lot of time and energy doing things like Minecraft or playing the video games or things that are very electronic, and the entertainment is provided for them. They just kind of have to sit there and absorb. But we need to kind of now start, when there's not an apocalypse, introducing our children into curiosity, like teaching them, oh, look at those stars, let's talk about the stars, and allowing them a space where they can experiment with things like a hammer and a nail, and what can they do with a hammer and a nail, and what can they do with a shovel. We kind of need to start with that, because that's something that for all of us, you don't know what you don't know till you don't know it. And our kids are starting, you know, when I say our kids, I've got an 8-year-old, and it's been fun reintroducing him to doing things outside. And you need to have a space where they can make a lot of mistakes and your life doesn't depend on it, where they can like not water the garden and go, oh, whoops, the carrots died, because our life doesn't depend on the carrots living or not. And I think it's really important that we include them in the things that we're doing. If you've got a neighbor kid watching you weed whack, say, hey, like, I'm weed whacking. Do you want to help? And I know that can be really challenging and not feel like you're being a total creep. But there are children in all of our lives that we can introduce into our hobbies, that we can introduce into the jobs that we're doing. Like, hey, hold this wrench while I take this battery out of this car. And they get fascinated, and it gives them a sense of confidence to try. It gives them a sense of that they can do the things without making the horrible mistakes and having, you know, I just think that that's a big part of it, is that we have to start, if we're not already doing it, including the kids in the practical things. Because if we are going to expect after the apocalypse for our children to be contributing to the tribe, the group, whatever, they have to have some confidence in making decisions and in actually functioning as adults in the tribe.
So yeah. To mention, when you have your kids helping you with projects like that, especially mechanics and stuff like that, you can teach them a whole new vocabulary.
Try not to teach them those words.
The technical, you're going to teach them the technical vocabulary for all the right parts.
Now here's the thing. In home education, we go out and we do field trips. But you don't have to be home educated to do this, because you can, as a parent, talk to a baker and say, hey, can I bring a bunch of kids over on a Saturday or Sunday morning and have you show them something about baking bread and how the yeast makes it rise. You can get an auto mechanic, say, hey, you know, could you teach the kids about changing the oil in the car? And if I'll bring, you know, it could be a scouting group, it could be a church group, or it could just be you know, 5 or 6 kids in your neighborhood that you can bring together and teach these. There's another, I think it used to be Home Depot, and I'm not sure that they do it now because of Rona, but they used to have Saturday morning classes for kids where they would learn how to hammer and nail or paint and things like that. So, or even, you know, maybe you're making a bookcase and you really don't care that it looks that pretty, you know, hand the paintbrush over to your kid and say, okay, you get to paint this for me.
Well, just a practical application of that. I was building shelves in my basement just the day before yesterday, and I had my 8-year-old helping me with a socket set. And that led to an entire discussion about what the numbers mean and the fractions and how it works and how to use the tool. And then he was able to screw some of the bolts in with the socket set, and his confidence went up, and it was a teaching opportunity for fractions and millimeters and how things are different and how things are the same. So
one of the things Sandra had mentioned is you start looking for your teachers 1 to 2 years down the road. The other thing I would say is don't discount that there are plenty of people who might end up that you wouldn't think of would have that knowledge. You want to teach calculus, you can find just about anybody in STEM and they can teach calculus.
mm-hmm.
You know, you want to teach basic, you know, physics, chemistry. Again, you find an engineer can teach you. They're not going to be able to teach you quantum mechanics, but at that point, we're not looking for quantum mechanics. They can teach you your basic physics. They can teach you your basic stuff.
And one of the things we want to do is we want to incorporate that science. So if you take a group of kids to go to a baker's and they're showing about how the yeast rises, you want to talk about the science of what the yeast is doing. What are the chemical reactions? When does the yeast die off? If you're talking about brewing, you're talking about the yeast and its byproducts and the different sugar contents versus the alcohol content. Because you're going to have a lot of institutional knowledge at the higher education level lost. Because unless it's being currently used, it's not going to be used, it's not going to be known.
When I was
Can we just
in
talk
Scotland,
for a second too of the importance of the apprentice program?
Yes.
oh yeah, the apprentice
And
programs
how
are great.
much, once we get past the first 6 months in survival, it really will be an apprentice type of an environment. The kids that are interested in animal husbandry are going to gravitate towards that and learn from the masters and absorb that wisdom and become kind of level up. There's a reason that apprenticeship and that whole system lasted for as long as it did, and
It's
why
still
it
around.
kind of evolved. Yeah, you know, and not only that, but I think pretty much every culture had some form of apprenticeship of that pathway.
Yeah.
And so
Largely
your mechanic is going to have kids coming in and like, hey, this is the first step. You're going to learn how to help us maintain these machines. And then as they get better and as the different kids and young adults show aptitudes, they're going to progress up the road. And you might have guys that are, when I say guys, you know, I mean like everybody, right? Girls and boys, everyone gets that. Okay, you're going to have dudes. How about dudes? Can we use dudes? Is that a proper pronoun? But you're going to have dudes that are very much, you know, like you might have the dudes who are jack of all trades. They have a basic level of competence in a large variety of fields because that's what's interesting to them. But kind of going on with what Sandra was saying, you're going to find the people that have the knowledge that you need to disseminate to the people of your tribe.
Okay, we're going to have to close this one down. I want to actually take us in the direction of books.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Okay, the other thing I want to emphasize is fine arts. So if I were you, I would put your children on some type of music program, acoustic guitar, violin, some instrument, acoustic piano, because we're not going to have electricity. But if they have the ability to take a guitar and play songs on it and sing and have people sing with them, that's going to be a little bit of an outlet from the stress of the day.
That's a great point. So if everybody would recommend a couple of books, what books should we be looking for, or sources or manuals or the like, briefly, because we've only got about a minute here.
Cooking books.
Basic plumbing.
Basic first aid and basic field sanitation. You know, how do you do a latrine when there's no sewage systems around?
Camping and hiking for beginners.
Yeah.
How about the Boy Scout manuals?
I like
Older ones.
the older
they've
ones.
got a pretty great breadth
It's called
and depth.
the Field Guide, the Boy Scout Field Guide or Field Manual.
There you go.
Math through calculus, and you want an algebra-based physics book, and you want a calculus-based physics book, because that will have the basics of a lot of what engineering is based off of, and a lot of math is going to be necessary for everything else.
Science books, biology, zoology, things like that. You guys need to be scavenging libraries and schools, and then grabbing and holding on to the books.
Older books that have less pictures. A lot of the newer books are full of pictures and tend to not have the knowledge you have, and then you're...
Or they have pictures that aren't relevant.
Right. They have a lot of pictures that aren't necessarily relevant. They have a lot more in there about this is how it's used in this day and age.
Okay.
I don't care about that nowadays. You look for older books when paper was more expensive. The books are smaller and still have the same amount of knowledge.
Great.
I would even say history books.
And
Yes.
readers.
And readers.
My recommendations would be The Dangerous Book for Girls, The Dangerous Book for Boys, and Back to Basic Books by Reader's Digest.
All right. Great choices all, and great recommendations. We're going to go ahead and wind this one down, and we'll be back with more apocalypse tips in a few minutes.